Well, this isn't what I expected I was going to be doing this morning, but I just got off the phone with my local John Deere dealer service department, and they said, bring it in again. So here we go. So what's this all about, really? Well, let's take a look at the dash here. So again, this is a little 4066, and we're just gonna scroll through. You can see I've got 1,096 hours on it. I've owned it for 600 of these hours, and we're just gonna scroll, and there you have it. 76% soot. And it won't go into regen. So I'm actually very familiar with the process to do a manual regen on this. And if we don't do a manual regen shortly, for those of you familiar with this equipment, it's just going to die quietly. The RPMs will cut back. You can't use most of the attachments. I get conflicting information from my local dealership. They say keep using it and push the throttle to the max or close to it. But the manual says differently and the YouTube videos say differently. And the bottom line is, and when I say I get conflicting information, this is the same dealer that also told me that if I don't do a regen, it can just go down to an idle or quit entirely, at which point I'm stuck winching it onto a flat deck to get it into the dealership. And there have been a number of instances that the dealership has documented where you have to winch on and then they literally have to winch off when you get to the dealership. Well, here's what annoys me about this a little bit. I picked this unit up. I've got lots of old equipment around. Well, not lots of it, but some old equipment. And if you've been watching this channel, you know that I often prefer old equipment for reasons just like this. So this piece of equipment, we're going to stick with the regen mostly today, but I got an almost new unit, knowing that Coral is very capable of operating the equipment. She's got horses, she has other animals, she's trucking stuff around. And at the time I bought this, I was still working full-time, and I wanted a super reliable machine, not one of my old pieces of junk, and a super reliable machine that she could jump into and rely on in my absence. And it just hasn't proven to be that. In addition to regen issues, I've had nuts and bolts just falling off here around the back end of this thing, and there's just no reason for that. In a day and age of locking nuts and Loctite, and given this only left the factory 1,100 hours ago, the nuts and bolts thing, they started falling off around 500 hours. So there you have it, but let's get back to the regen issue. And so I know the process, and this is now episode number 4 of me having to take this in for one issue and one issue only, and that is the diesel exhaust. Well, this doesn't have diesel exhaust fluid. Let's just call it the regen issue. And I'm at a bit of a loss to know what to do when every second time it needs to go into regen, it doesn't. So there's my little rant. Come along for the ride and let's see how this turns out. Hey, just pulled out of the yard here, and safety first. Just double checked my cinches, make sure everything's tight. This bumpy little road down here behind me gives lots of opportunity to shake down a load before hitting the highway. And you know, it just occurs to me in my frustration and annoyance here about having to load this unit up once again. Just did the math. So I've owned it 600 hours. This is trip number 4. So every 150 hours, I've had to take it in for a computer reset, something I can't do or tackle. And yeah, you know, I'm 30 minutes from right now till when I'm unloading at the dealership. But I was just watching some videos from a couple friends of mine, Ryan and Melody. Their little YouTube channel is called My Wild Home, HOLM. And they bought themselves an island somewhere up north in this province. And they have a little ferry, and they have a couple of pieces of equipment over on the island. They're building themselves a beautiful home over there. And they own the whole island, but they have to have this little barge that ferries them and their equipment back and forth to this little island on a large lake. And if they were going through this, think about the rigmarole they would have to go through to every 150 hours. They'd have to barge off island and then probably drive for 3 hours. That's just not acceptable. And so stay tuned. Come along for the entire saga. Okay, so let's move on with the rest of the story. Since I started this episode, it snowed and the machine was in the dealership for about 3 days, so it's that time of year. And hey, before we get into the main subject matter, got a couple of great sticks there that I'm going to tackle with the Alaska chainsaw mill. They're too big for my little mill, so stay tuned for an episode around that. And I'm going to refer to some notes here periodically to keep me from rambling like I am now. So we're back. The machine runs. I was doing a little work with it this morning. All four wheels are actually rotating in the correct direction. And, but you know what? Just because my teeth are showing doesn't mean I'm smiling about this whole experience. So I got to tell you, though, that the dealership and the team there is just extraordinary. I've now dealt with 3 different of their branches. And the experience is uniformly good in terms of team personnel. And I actually, with everything that John Deere is going through right now, I actually feel a little bit sorry for the dealership and the team. Having said that, when I first started having issues with these, with the emissions item that we're talking about today, I had a representative of this dealership who's no longer there tell me, you know, Howard, all the major manufacturers are having problems with these emissions issues. Well, you know what? I got to tell you, that statement probably didn't land like it was intended because, yes, it's a government initiative on the emissions issues, but I expect an equipment manufacturer that charges me good dollars, and this piece of equipment came in at well over $70,000 Canadian, used with 500 hours on it. I expect that equipment to perform. I do not expect to go into a farm supply store, come out with a brand new bucket, get it home, go to pour some water into it, and it's leaking. And when I go back to the store looking for satisfaction, it would be unacceptable to have them say, oh, you know what, Howard, I think other manufacturers' buckets leak as well. That doesn't cut it. And so I think it's time for manufacturers to pull up their socks a little bit. As a former business partner of mine was fond of saying, this is a you problem, not a me problem. So don't make it my problem. And I'm really feeling like John Deere is having some issues and are making it my problem. And that just doesn't go down well. So where this leaves me is I think I've probably bought my last new or near new machine. I just find the reliability of older equipment to be far superior. When Coral and I purchased this property, you may recall, if you've watched previous episodes, that we inherited a 5102, and it was a 2007 vintage. We got this property in 2021, so do the math. That thing was 14 years old, and amazingly, and I don't recommend this, it had 2,700 hours on it, as I recall. We took it in for service. It had been clear this machine had never been back to the dealership since the day it was purchased. There was no record of it ever having gone back to the dealership. we discovered it still had the factory original oil filter. The oil filter had not been changed in 2,700 hours. And so I doubt that any of the other fluids in the machine had been changed. The previous owner did tell me that he did change the oil in it. Again, I don't recommend it, but that machine ran flawlessly, and you have no idea the number of times that I've wished I had it back and that I hadn't sold it. And I'm not talking about, when I'm talking about issues, I'm not talking about maintenance scheduled issues or scheduled maintenance issues. I'm talking about issues that bring a machine to a grinding halt or impair performance to the extent that I've got to load it up on a flat deck trailer over there and haul it off to the dealership. So I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here for just a bit. As a hobby farmer, my equipment, for the most part, is not going to any job sites off of this property. But can you imagine somebody having a piece of equipment like this that's had to be loaded up and taken to the dealership 4 times in the last 600 hours for emissions issues only? What that does to that owner's reputation? This machine, for emissions issues only, in the last 600 hours, has spent 12 full working days in the dealership to correct those issues. I just find that totally incomprehensible. And you know what? If dealers can't explain it and the customer can't use it, what's the point of even buying it? And that's what's taken me to my statement about looking for good used equipment pre-emissions as I go forward. You know what? Coral feels even more strongly on this matter than I do, but perhaps from a different perspective, because in my world, there's no way that a computer is going to run my life. As Coral would tell you, that's her job. But there's more. For those of you John Deere owners that are struggling with similar issues, it appears that after 4 years of battling this machine over auto regen issues and park regen issues, and I use park regen to address the auto regen issues proactively. If you're not familiar with what the issues are, what happens is when, on this machine at least, when the reading on the dash gets to about 82% soot level, it is supposed to go into auto regen. At least once, that's failed completely, which causes a computer fault, which causes the machine to go into limp mode. I actually thought I was going to have to winch it onto that flat deck in order to get it into the dealership. And I want to be proactive around that, because on the other occasions when it did go into auto regen, and it's gone into auto regen about half the time when a regen is required, the manual, and I've got my little manual here, and I've got it yellow stickied all to pieces, and if you have a John Deere, you'll have a similar manual. The manual is at best ambiguous and confusing and easily opens up more questions than it answers. There's conflicting information and a lack of clarity around whether you can continue using the machine. For sure, you wouldn't want to continue using the machine when it goes into auto regen, because the exhaust system reaches a horrific temperature level and you could easily start a fire. We live in a crazy fire zone, and we're on high alert every summer. And so if I'm doing some work, digging up some soil out in a field or doing something else out there, brush hogging, to have it go into auto regen and start building temperature in dry or fairly dry grass conditions, that could be disastrous. And so you just don't want that. And further in the manual, in the park regen area, it specifically states, and I read, "No other machine functions can be used while exhaust filter cleaning is taking place. It's abundant and clear, and in fact, the manufacturer bolded the print. And the auto regen just doesn't speak to that issue. So I've had dealership personnel tell me, no, keep using the machine and work it hard during that time. Well, you know what? That dealership person may not be with that dealership when the machine goes in, and because I've done something wrong, I'm now on the hook for the repairs. The manual doesn't speak to that issue at all in the auto regen section. And if you're confused by now in terms of what I'm saying, so am I, because the manual, like I said, can best be described as ambiguous, confusing, and opening up more questions than it answers. Fortunately, due to my prior profession and partly due to this YouTube channel, I've made some interesting connections across the continent. And it turns out that John Deere has actually issued for dealers' eyes only bulletin that apparently letting them know that for a customer to do a parked regen, the soot level needs to be above 77% and or 50 hours have to have elapsed since the last regen.
Okay.
A dealership representative had told me 70% soot level, but it actually turns out, according to the manufacturer's bulletin, it turns out to be a 77% soot level before park regen can take place. We have a couple of puppies around here, and they're insisting on fighting with each other right under Coral's legs while she's trying to do the videoing here. Welcome to the hobby farm. So, you'll have heard me say that this machine, at least, has gone into auto regen at 82%. So if I can't do a parked regen until 77%, that's a pretty narrow window. But at least now we finally, after nearly 4 years, have clarity around the regen process. Whoa, it's a cold day, but I'm sweating just thinking about that. And so, you know what? Nothing that I've been able to access on the web has clarified that 77% and 50-hour parameter for regen. Now the dogs are bumping me around. I don't know. Dogs are funny. They insist on playing right around our legs. And so at least I'm feeling I have some clarity going forward. And around that, what I did is Coral's going to focus here on the machine for a minute. I've taken and created some notes, and I've literally, using as close as I can get to John Deere colors, glued up a little cheat sheet here, and I'll throw a photo in as well, that steps me through the process as I understand it now. Carl's smoothing out my duct tape work. Hey, that's the handyman's favorite secret weapon, duct tape. And we use lots of it around here. What else do I have to say? You know what? Nothing more than to say I really would welcome your tips, your comments, your experiences on this subject. Hey, I'm pulling for you. We're all in this together, and let's do this. Onward.